The Ranoth Dominion had conquered 100 worlds, crushed rebellions before they had time to fully ignite, and bent lesser civilizations to their will with nothing more than a show of force. Their fleets cast shadows over entire planetary systems. Their war engines reshaped landscapes with the flick of a command, and their empire stood unchallenged for nearly a millennium. And yet, here they were, gathered in the High Command War Chamber, staring at the intelligence briefing that had just arrived. High Commander Zyrek, a towering figure with an exoskeletal frame of polished obsidian and 6 predatory eyes, leaned forward. His mandibles twitched as he read the latest reports from the front lines. Humans, he spat the word as if it were an insult. They send an army the size of a child's play squad, and they think they can stand against the Dominion? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered officers, each more adorned in ceremonial armor than the last, their pride swelling in the face of such obvious absurdity. Perhaps it is some form of primitive negotiation tactic, offered Admiral Draknu, tapping his claws against the holotable. Surely they do not expect to win a battle with such a limited force. A lower-ranking officer, a communication specialist, adjusted the projection before them, displaying the tactical data more clearly. The human force consists of a single battalion, less than 1,000 soldiers, and, he hesitated, the hesitation alone unusual enough to draw several sets of eyes upon him. Zyrek's gaze narrowed. And what? The officer swallowed, clearly uncomfortable. Their unit is primarily composed of female warriors. A moment of silence passed, then laughter. It began as a snicker from one officer, before cascading into full-bodied amusement that filled the chamber. Zyrek, for all his usual stoicism, allowed a dry chuckle to escape his mandibles. The idea was preposterous. Perhaps, Draknu managed between chuckles, this is some kind of human custom? A show of their lesser warriors before they bring forth their true soldiers. It is a final insult, another officer suggested, barely suppressing his own amusement. An acknowledgement that they have already lost. Zyrek leaned back, tapping his clawed fingers against the metal armrest of his throne-like chair. Either way, this is no war. This is a spectacle. Deploy the subjugation forces immediately. This will be over in an hour. The order was met with eager nods, officers and generals relishing the thought of what would surely be the easiest victory in the Dominion's history. On the surface of Arden 5, the dusty, barren world where the humans had chosen to make their stand, Captain Jenna Rose adjusted her gloves and peered through her visor at the approaching Ranoth forces. They really brought the whole damn welcome wagon, she muttered, chewing lazily on a piece of gum. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Sarah Escuela, smirked beside her, running a final diagnostic on her gauntlet-mounted tactical display. You'd think we insulted their mothers or something. The Ranoth dropships roared as they descended, sending plumes of dust spiraling into the air. Their forces deployed in pristine formation, their shining exo-armor reflecting the dim sunlight as they stood in perfect ranks, disciplined and ready. The contrast between the two forces was almost comical. The Ranoth, statuesque, flawless, moving in synchronized precision. The humans? A scattered assembly of relaxed soldiers, adjusting gear, cracking jokes, stretching as if they had all the time in the universe. A transmission flickered to life in Jenna's earpiece. Human force. This is High Commander Zyrek of the Ranoth Dominion. Surrender now, and you will be granted leniency. Jenna tapped the side of her earpiece. Sorry, couldn't hear that over all the dramatic spaceship noises. Mind repeating? A long, drawn-out silence followed. Zyrek's voice returned, this time clipped, irritated. I said, Yeah, I heard you. Jenna cut him off, exhaling slowly. Gotta say, love the confidence. Real, intimidating, and all. But see, here's the thing, we're not really the surrendering type. Zyrek's irritation curdled into something more dangerous. You are outnumbered, outmatched. You are a handful of women. Jenna finished for him. Yeah, got that vibe from your whole try not to laugh routine back in your war room. Look, I get it. You think we're soft, weak, easy win. But tell me, Zyrek, she popped her gum. You ever had your ass kicked by a lesser warrior before? A series of amused chuckles echoed through the human ranks, and Escuela nudged her lightly. You're really pushing the buttons on this one. It's fun, Jenna shrugged. The first wave of Renath troops advanced. Their movements were flawless, synchronized, a testament to centuries of disciplined warfare. Their weapons glowed with pulsating energy, their combat suits shifting in response to battlefield conditions. And yet, they were missing one crucial element. They had no idea what they were about to walk into. The first shots rang out. Jenna and her unit moved, not in predictable formation, but with the fluid unpredictability of soldiers who had learned to adapt, to improvise, to fight dirty when necessary. A Renath soldier raised his plasma rifle to fire, only to be taken down by a perfectly timed projectile. Not a bullet, a wrench. The soldier stumbled, disoriented, just as Escuela capitalized on the moment, sliding beneath his stance and using his own momentum to flip him over. To the Renath, warfare was a calculated science. To the humans, it was a game of opportunity. More of the Dominion's elite warriors fell, undone not by superior technology or brute force, but by the sheer chaotic ingenuity of human combat. A well-placed kick to the knee joint, a deceptive feint that lured an enemy into a trap, an improvised explosion using nothing but battlefield scraps. Jenna laughed as she watched another Renath go down, this time from a well-placed throw of a coffee canister. I'm starting to think they didn't do their homework on us. Zyrek, watching from the command vessel, gritted his mandibles. This was unacceptable. This was beyond comprehension. These humans, these female warriors, they were mocking them, dismantling their forces with a mix of calculated aggression and reckless abandon. They fought with no regard for traditional warfare, no adherence to tactics that could be predicted. Every engagement was different. Every maneuver was a feint within a feint, an attack that led to another, an endless barrage of misdirection and brutality. And worse, they laughed while they did it. Zyrek slammed a fist against the armrest of his command chair. Deploy the second wave. No more games. The order was given, and the battlefield trembled as the second deployment hit the ground. Heavier armor, deadlier weaponry. Reinforcements meant to ensure an inevitable end. Jenna exhaled, rolling her shoulders. Oh look, they're finally taking us seriously. Escuela cracked her knuckles. Good. I was getting bored. From the Renatha's perspective, it was time to finish what should never have been a battle in the first place. From the human's perspective, it was just getting started. The second wave hit the battlefield like a storm of metal and fire, Renath war machines pounding into the dust with seismic force. Their heavy infantry, armored like walking fortresses, advanced with the precision of a well-oiled war machine. Energy shields flared to life, flickering blue domes, absorbing the first volley of human fire. Plasma rifles hummed as they charged, their soldiers moving forward with the confidence of a species that had never truly tasted defeat. Captain Jenna Rose watched them come, tilting her head with an amused smirk. All right, now they're actually trying. Lieutenant Escuela adjusted the tactical visor on her helmet. Yeah, but they're still fighting like they're in a damn instruction manual. I bet their battle doctrine is 1,000 pages long and has an appendix on proper laser etiquette. The Renath did everything by the book. They had studied Earth warfare, their analysts poring over human military history with cold precision. They had cataloged strategic formations, dissected classic maneuvers, and determined the most effective countermeasures. And not a single one of those studies had prepared them for what was happening right now. Jenna nodded toward her squad. Ladies, let's give Em a lesson in unsportsmanlike conduct. The first wave of Renath fired, their plasma rounds screaming through the air in perfect synchronization. The human soldiers, instead of retreating, ran straight at them. One Renath officer barely had time to process the absurdity of the maneuver before he was yanked off his feet by a tripwire that had been strung across a battlefield wreck. He landed hard, right before a soldier tossed something at him. His 6 eyes widened as he processed the incoming object. A grenade? No. A rock. A regular rock. He barely had time to register the insult before a real grenade landed at his feet and sent him sprawling across the battlefield. The Renatha's disciplined approach collapsed in real time. They were used to fights where formations mattered, where brute force and superior numbers were enough. But the humans were everywhere, nowhere, unpredictable and unrelenting. A squad of Renath had taken up a defensive position behind a shielding node, their backs against the wreckage of a fallen drop pod. It was a perfect tactical choice, one that would have secured a standard victory, until a human dropped from above, landing right in their midst with a wild grin. Sergeant Kim Owens, a demolitions expert with a particular love for reckless maneuvers, cracked her neck as a half-dozen Renath turned to stare at her in complete, stunned silence. "Hey boys," she greeted, adjusting the strap on her shoulder. "Ever heard of shock and awe?" Before they could react, she slammed a detonator against the shielding node and flipped backward over the wreckage. The shield imploded in a spectacular blue burst, leaving the Renath squad wide open for the heavy turret fire that followed a second later. The carnage was immediate. Escuela, watching from a ridge, let out a low whistle. "Kim's gonna be insufferable after this." Jenna clicked her radio. "Nice work, Owens. Now if you're done terrifying the locals, we've got a new problem." Because despite the sheer absurdity of human tactics, the Renath were adapting. They were a proud species, but they weren't stupid. Their combat AI had already started analyzing human behavior, adjusting strategies in real time. The chaos of the first wave had been a shock, but now their second wave was learning, adjusting, and countering. Jenna felt it before she saw it, her instincts screaming that something had changed. The Renath were no longer advancing recklessly. They were falling back, tightening their formations, using their shield nodes more effectively. "All right," she muttered. They finally got the memo. Then the first arc disruptor hit. A crackling wave of ionized energy pulsed across the battlefield, disabling all active human electronics in a 30-meter radius. Tactical displays flickered and died. Auto-aim systems reset to factory settings. Communications turned to static. Jenna's squad, so reliant on their adaptive gear, suddenly found themselves disconnected from their battlefield network. And that's when the Renath counterattacked. They moved fast, capitalizing on the momentary lapse. Renath warriors surged forward in coordinated waves, their melee units closing the distance with bladed plasma spears that crackled with energy. One soldier lunged at Escuela, aiming a precise thrust at her midsection. She twisted at the last second, catching the spear's haft under her arm and using the soldier's momentum against him, flipping him hard onto the ground. But more were coming. "All right," Jenna growled, yanking her sidearm free and firing point-blank into an advancing Renatha's faceplate. No fancy toys, no problem. The battlefield descended into brutal close-quarters combat. Without their high-tech gear, the humans had to rely on their most primal advantage, sheer adaptability. Renath soldiers swung their weapons in precise, trained arcs. The humans? They fought dirty. A Renath brought his blade down at Private Danny Harper. She caught his wrist, mid-swing, and headbutted him so hard his visor cracked. Another warrior grabbed Sergeant Owens in a grapple. She bit him. Hard. "Did she just bite me?" the alien shrieked, recoiling in horror. Owens spat. "You taste like a car battery." Jenna saw another Renath warrior moving toward her, a massive brute of a soldier, at least 8 feet tall. His armor was heavier, reinforced. He was clearly their answer to human unpredictability, big, strong, no nonsense. Jenna holstered her gun. "All right, buddy," she muttered. "Let's see how you handle." Before she could finish, the Renath threw a punch. A punch she dodged with a grace that defied physics. The moment his fist sailed past, she sidestepped, grabbed his forearm, and drove her knee into his ribs with bone-crunching force. He staggered. She followed up immediately, grabbing his arm and twisting hard, forcing him down with a maneuver that had probably been illegal in her high school wrestling team. He hit the ground with a sickening thud. The battlefield was shifting again. The humans, despite being outnumbered, outgunned, and technologically disabled, were winning the melee engagements. And the Renath did not know how to handle it, because this wasn't a war to the humans anymore. This was a brawl. This was a Friday night bar fight behind an old gas station. This was the kind of dirty, no-holds-barred, wild swinging melee that the Renath had never encountered. Zyrek, watching from orbit, gripped the edge of his command chair so hard it began to dent under his fingers. "Unacceptable," he hissed. "This is unacceptable." His officers were silent, because the truth was becoming clear. The humans didn't fight fair. They didn't fight like the Renath, and that made them unstoppable. Jenna, now standing on the body of the unconscious Renath brute she had just suplexed, clicked her radio back on. "All right," she said. "They had their turn. Let's remind them why they should have stayed in bed this morning." The humans, battered but grinning like lunatics, rallied. The Renath, for the first time in their long, proud history, stumbled. The battle wasn't over, but the power dynamic had shifted. The war room aboard the Renath command vessel had become a place of uneasy silence, a stark contrast to the confident laughter that had filled it before the battle began. High Commander Zyrek stood motionless, his 6 eyes fixed on the battlefield monitors, his mandibles twitching as he processed what he was seeing. This was not how it was supposed to go. The second wave had been sent with the expectation of crushing the humans, of wiping away the insult of their defiance in a clean, orderly engagement. Instead, what should have been a decisive blow had turned into an outright disaster. Zyrek's officers stood at attention, their postures rigid, their faces betraying the creeping edge of doubt. These were not low-ranking foot soldiers. These were seasoned warlords, battle-hardened strategists who had led campaigns against countless enemies across the stars. And none of them had an answer for what was happening. The humans were winning, not through superior technology, not through sheer numbers, but through something else, something that defied tactical prediction and war doctrine. They were fighting with reckless ingenuity, adapting in ways that shouldn't be possible. Where the Renath relied on discipline, calculation, and overwhelming firepower, the humans countered with absurdity, spontaneity, and unrelenting audacity. And worst of all, they were enjoying it. Zyrek's claws curled into fists as he watched live combat feeds, unable to look away from the chaos unfolding on the battlefield. A Renath warrior attempted a textbook plasma sweep, an efficient, wide-area strike designed to eliminate multiple targets. The humans ducked, rolled, and one of them even jumped off another's back to dropkick the attacker in the face. Another Renath squad had retreated behind their energy barricades, assuming a tight phalanx formation, shields interlocking seamlessly. The humans responded by hijacking a downed Renath supply transport, ramming it directly into the formation, and leaping off at the last second while screaming something about style points. Zyrek inhaled sharply, his patience fraying. "Deploy the Annihilator-class dreadnoughts," he commanded, his voice clipped, emotionless. "Orbital bombardment will commence." Several officers exchanged glances, their unease palpable. Admiral Draknu hesitated. "High Commander, the battlefield is not yet cleared of our own forces. If we engage with orbital fire now—" Zyrek whipped around, eyes narrowing dangerously. "Are you suggesting we hold back?" Draknu straightened, but there was something, a flicker of doubt, in his stance. Zyrek leaned in, his voice low and sharp. "If you are incapable of executing this war properly, Admiral, then perhaps you should remove yourself from my sight before I remove you from my fleet." Draknu stiffened, nodding once before turning to relay the order. Zyrek turned back to the battle, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. The Renath Dominion had never lost a planetary engagement, and he would not be the first commander to break that streak. Jenna Rose wiped a streak of dust from her face, exhaling as she watched the second Renath wave collapse. It had been a tough fight, but the result was undeniable. They had pushed them back. She turned to Escuela, who was leaning against a wrecked Renath walker, casually reloading her rifle. "Think they're getting the message yet?" Escuela asked. Jenna let out a short laugh. "Nah, they're stubborn bastards. Probably still convinced they've got us on the ropes." Before Escuela could respond, Jenna's tactical display flickered back to life, a sign that whatever EMP tech the Renault had used was no longer disrupting their systems. And the first thing she saw on the screen made her blood run cold. Orbital bombardment incoming. Her jaw clenched. Oh, you sons of... The first shockwave hit seconds later. The sky above them flashed white, then split apart as the first orbital plasma strikes impacted the ground. The sheer force of the detonation sent massive pillars of fire into the air, the ground splitting apart under the intensity of the blast. The Renault were burning their own battlefield. "Everyone move!" Jenna shouted, already breaking into sprint. The human forces scattered, racing for whatever cover they could find as the planet's surface was transformed into a living hellscape. The Renault had abandoned all strategy. They had resorted to the final, desperate option of all failing empires: indiscriminate annihilation. Jenna dived behind a fallen transport, hitting the ground hard as a nearby explosion sent a shockwave of fire and debris overhead. "This is insane," Escuela growled, sliding into cover beside her. "They're torching their own people." Jenna wiped the sweat from her brow, watching as Renault ground troops, those still alive, began retreating, scrambling to avoid the devastation that was now raining down upon them. Zyrek was not trying to win anymore. He was trying to erase the battlefield altogether. Jenna refused to let that happen. She tapped into the comms, reaching out to their support fleet still stationed beyond the system's gravity well. "Command, this is Rose. Renault forces have initiated planetary bombardment. Repeat, they are wiping the field. We need immediate." Her voice cut out as a Renault fighter squadron roared overhead, unloading a volley of targeted munitions that reduced an entire human forward outpost to slag in an instant. Her gut twisted. They were running out of time. She grabbed her rifle, forcing herself to focus. "We need to take out their targeting systems. If they can't paint the battlefield, they can't hit us." Escuela peered over their cover. "Easier said than done, Cap. Their targeting relays are on their main command vessel, and in case you haven't noticed, that thing's still in orbit." Jenna thought fast. They needed a way to disable that ship. But how? Her eyes landed on a damaged Renault supply craft, its engines still flickering with residual power. A mad idea took shape in her mind. "Escuela," she said, standing. "Get the squad. We're taking that ship." Escuela blinked. "Please tell me you're not suggesting." "We get on that ship, we punch a hole straight into their command vessel, and we end this." There was a pause. Then Escuela's mouth curled into a grin. "I love when you get suicidal ideas." Jenna tapped her comms. "All units, new objective. We're taking the fight to orbit. Move out." Across the battlefield, human forces mobilized, converging on the Renault supply craft. The Renault, now fully in retreat, barely put up a fight, most of them too preoccupied with surviving their own orbital bombardment to stop the humans from commandeering the ship. Jenna took the pilot seat, gripping the controls. The craft rumbled, its engines surging to life. From the command vessel, Zyrek's eyes widened in disbelief. "Commander," one of his officers stammered, "the humans, they are coming here." Zyrek turned, his mandibles clicking together tightly. "Impossible," he growled. But it wasn't. Because the humans didn't think like conquerors. They thought like survivors. And survivors always found a way to win. The Renault High Command watched in stunned silence as a single heavily damaged supply craft broke free of the battlefield. Its trajectory locked directly onto the command vessel. Zyrek finally understood. This was not just a battle anymore. This was the beginning of a reckoning. And for the first time in his life, he felt fear. The Renault command vessel shuddered violently as alarms screamed through its corridors. High Commander Zyrek barely managed to brace himself against the control panel before another impact sent a ripple through the ship's core structure. Sparks rained from overhead conduits. The smell of scorched metal and ionized air filled the bridge. This cannot be happening," Zyrek hissed, his mandibles clicking together in disbelief. A single human transport had breached their orbital security net, punched straight through their defensive blockade, and was now buried deep within the heart of their flagship. His officers scrambled for control, their usual stoic discipline crumbling under the weight of sheer chaos. The ship's artificial gravity flickered, causing some of them to stumble as systems failed in cascading bursts. Zyrek turned toward the main viewport just in time to see the blown-out hull of the lower decks, gaping like an open wound. And from the smoke and wreckage, they emerged, the human soldiers, tattered but standing, grinning like they had just walked into their favorite dive bar instead of the belly of an alien warship. At the front of the group, Captain Jenna rose, cracked her knuckles, and let out a slow exhale. Her uniform was smeared with dust and blood, but her eyes were sharp, focused, and carrying that same maddening confidence that had rattled the Renoth from the start. Behind her, Escuela adjusted her rifle, scanning the Renoth command chamber like she was checking out the beer selection at a questionable roadside gas station. "You ever been inside one of these before?" Escuela asked. "First time," Jen admitted, rolling her shoulders. "Nice decor. Very dictator chic. Bit too much glowing neon, though. What is it with evil empires and dramatic lighting?" A few of the Renoth officers took a step back, unnerved. Their empire had lasted centuries, built upon the unshakable foundation of absolute dominance. And yet, in that moment, they felt powerless. Zyrek forced himself to stand tall, to project strength, but there was a cold weight in his chest that he could not shake. "Enough of this," he growled. "You may have survived longer than expected, but you are still insects beneath the might of the Renoth Dominion." Jenna tilted her head. "Right. And remind me, who's standing in whose warship again?" Zyrek's hand shot to his sidearm, but Jenna moved first. In a blur of motion, she closed the distance, knocked his weapon aside, and drove a punch straight into his chest plate. The impact sent shockwaves through his exoskeletal armor, forcing him back as pain exploded through his ribs. The command bridge erupted into battle. Escuela and the others engaged the remaining Renoth officers, their movements a chaotic whirlwind of close-quarters combat and well-placed gunfire. The Renoth were stronger, larger, but the humans fought dirty, using everything at their disposal. A Renoth warrior lunged for Owens, only for her to grab a discarded data tablet and smash it against his face. Another soldier tried to take cover, but Escuela yanked a cable loose from a nearby console and wrapped it around his legs, sending him crashing into a pile of sparking equipment. The bridge descended into utter pandemonium. Jenna never let up on Zyrek, driving him back with relentless attacks. The commander was fast, his species' natural reflexes giving him an edge, but she was faster. "You want to know the real reason you lost?" she said, dodging a wild strike and slamming her knee into his midsection. Zyrek gasped as pain shot through his frame. "You don't know how to adapt," Jenna continued, grabbing him by the collar of his armor and yanking him forward so they were face to face. "You fight wars the way they've always been fought. You think that because you're bigger, stronger, and better equipped, that means you win by default." She threw him down, hard. "But wars aren't won by who has the best tech," she said, standing over him. "They're won by who refuses to lose." Zyrek struggled to push himself up, but before he could reach for his weapon, Escuela stepped in, leveling a stolen Renoth pistol at his head. Jenna dusted off her gloves. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call for a full retreat. You're going to take your fancy ships and your ego, and you're going to haul us out of this sector. And then you're going to tell the rest of your dominion exactly what happened here." Zyrek's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" Jenna leaned down, close enough that her voice dropped into a dangerous whisper. "Then I open every single airlock on this ship and let your soldiers drift home in pieces." Silence. For the first time in his life, Zyrek understood fear. With a slow, trembling hand, he reached for his command console and activated the fleet-wide emergency recall signal. Across the planet, Renoth forces disengaged. Their warships began peeling away from orbit, retreating in a chaotic, disgraceful exodus. The battle was over. Jenna watched as the recall order flashed across the command display, then turned toward Escuela. "How long before this gets out?" she asked. Escuela snorted. "Oh, it's already out. Every surveillance drone caught this mess in 4K. This is going galactic viral by tomorrow." Jenna smirked. "Good. The Runoth Dominion had never experienced defeat. Not like this. Word of the battle spread like wildfire, crossing entire sectors in days. Holoscreens and comm feeds exploded with the footage. A species that had been considered lesser, not just defeating, but humiliating the galaxy's most feared military power. Commentators, comedians, and strategists across the galaxy tore the Runoth apart. One particularly popular clip showed a Runoth officer getting knocked unconscious by a well-aimed coffee mug. The phrase, "hold this nerd," spoken moments before impact, became an instant meme. Another viral edit replayed the moment when Jenna Rose suplexed a Runoth brute in the middle of battle, complete with added wrestling announcer audio. The Dominion's reputation crumbled overnight. Worlds that had once submitted without question now saw them as a joke. Rebellions ignited across Runoth-controlled territories. Other alien empires, once too afraid to challenge their rule, began withdrawing alliances. The fear that had sustained their rule was shattered. And at the heart of it all, one truth became undeniable. The humans were not weak. They were not primitive. They were terrifying. Jenna and her squad stood aboard their own battlecruiser, watching the last Runoth ships retreat into deep space. Escuela leaned on the railing beside her, shaking her head. "Think they'll try again?" Escuela asked. Jenna smirked. "Maybe. But next time, they won't be underestimating us." She turned, staring out at the vast expanse of space, at the galactic stage they had just rewritten. "Next time," she murmured, "they'll be afraid." And for the first time in history, the galaxy knew what it meant to fear humans.